Welcome to the Museum at FIT's Fashion Culture Online series. My name is Tania Melendez-Escalante, and I am Senior Curator of Education and Public Programs. It is my honor to introduce fashion designer Byron Lars, who will converse with MFIT's Director and Chief Curator, Dr. Valerie Steele, about his career, which started in the 1990s with a small collection of sportswear focusing on what Lars refers to as twisted American classics. In 2020, Lars partnered with longtime colleague Sheila Gray to found In EARNEST, a newly established iteration of the firmly established clothing brand. We hope you enjoy the show.
Byron, it's so nice to see you today. The museum at FIT owns several of your designs, including one of your famous 1991 twisted shirt dresses. I thought I'd start, since you've been a fashion designer for more than 30 years. Can you start by telling us about the arc of your career from when you began to today?
Sure. I was born in the little town of Now. I had you scared there. No, actually, after leaving FIT, I took a bunch of short-term jobs as assistant designer, which back in those days involved pattern making. And that was like kind of my first love, is building clothes as opposed to like fashion, really, you know, like problem solving and all that stuff. So I got lots of work in that area. And while freelancing, I started my first collection in 1991. I guess at the end of 90, I started developing it, and it was a little group of baseball jacket inspired dresses. Back then, there were a lot more wholesale fabric resources that you could go to, like Jobbers, like with ends of production runs from other like really great houses that had amazing fabric, but hey, they have 100 yards left over, so they sell it to this guy at a discounted price. And then people like me would come along with small companies and buy it up. Of course, the risk being you didn't have the money to buy it all at the time. So by the time your production came along, good luck if it's still around. That was always like, it was always a gamble in terms of, will there be fabric when I'm in production? But this first group was made out of this Duchess satin, which was pretty reliable in colors in the market. So, you know, back then it was like there was no social media. So I put them in a garment bag and slung them over my back and went from door to door to stores, usually without an appointment because nobody knew who I was. You know what I mean? It was incredibly presumptuous and probably bordering rude, but that was the only way anybody was ever going to see me, was to kind of take the bull by the horns and do it that way. And one of the first that did see me was the store Henry Bendel. And they were reputed for launching young designers, you know, traditionally, the most famous of which was Stephen Burrows. They opened up a whole department for him in the 70s, Stephen Burrows World. So I thought they'd probably be pretty great store to start with. And I guess I was right, because they gave me my first and then only order, because that once I got an order, I was like, that's it. That's all I can fill. I don't have the money for any more than this. So I had, from my grading courses taken at FIT, and I kept my grading ruler. I graded the patterns and took the production, though, to a cutting room. I didn't cut the production, but I did grade all the patterns myself from that very important class that you should be paying attention to. I think it's not important. And actually had the production made at a small factory that used to make duplicate samples for a company, one of the companies that I worked for. In fact, the last company I worked for before going out on my own and freelancing to supplement my income. And so that's another lesson there too. Every contact you make is potentially a viable contact, because I had no idea that I'd be working with them in that capacity, that they'd be saving my life and basically launching my business. But they did. I mean, they saw that I was a hard worker for my company, and they gave me a chance, and even extended me a bit of credit. I didn't have to pay them until they finished the production, which was pretty unheard of, but extremely generous. And, you know, of course, I made good on that promise and delivered those goods to myself in a box to the shipping department at Henry Bendel. And to my surprise, they gave me Fifth Avenue windows. I was like, of course, nobody tells you this. I'm just walking by, you know, with the bag slung over my back. Again.
That's my stuff up there.
It was really, when we talk about old school and the old school days, I mean, it was old school. There was a lot of physical labor involved. There was none of this Zoom convenience, which is amazing. And I mean, you can be everywhere in an hour or less. You can be in other parts of the country, other parts of the world. But then you had to be in a person's office and hope that they would see you. And yeah, so once I got those windows, which was like super thrilling, obviously, I started taking the same bag of samples. Then I worked on a new collection. So those things were in the window, and I worked on the first shirt dress, which was in that bag, the one that you guys own, as a matter of fact. And I started taking them around to magazines like Vogue and Bazaar. And one of the editors at Bazaar was friends, or not friends, but colleagues with who would become my first business partner in this. And it's Marianne Wheaton.
Yeah. And
she had a really impressive pedigree in this business, having worked with Saint Laurent and, you know, Karl Lagerfeld, and most recently, before we started working together, Patrick Kelly, who was the first American, let alone Black American, to be accepted in the Chambre Syndicale, you know, the French governing body that says who is and who is not actually sanctioned to show in Paris. And so that was a really big deal. But he was owned by an American company, which she secured. And so she traversed the country back and forth, and he tragically succumbed to AIDS-related illnesses. And she opened up her own company here, which a few short months after that, an editor from Bazaar sent me to her offices. I hadn't heard her name in the midst of all the Patrick Kelly hoopla that we were all caught up in at the time. But I knew, and I was like, is she a store? Because I'm like, I'll need to know the order really soon. And she was not. The editor didn't really explain to me exactly what she did, but she was like, listen, she's certainly somebody that you want to know. And I certainly did take note of that advice. And I knew that if I ever wanted to darken that door again, I better at least follow the lead that she gave me. So I did, but I wasn't super excited about it. I was just like, this was just a means of me to get back into Bazaar and maybe get some, you know, coverage. And as it turned out, you know, obviously we hit it off, and that was my first business partner. And we started this company, and actually together we manufactured that twist dress that is at FIT right now. And it was made in a factory on 25th Street.
That's so amazing.
Yeah, 2 blocks and 2 avenues away from the school itself.
It was a different world then. The whole system was organized so differently.
Yeah, it really was. It was a lot more hands-on. It was a lot more, you felt like you were really a part of a community then, because you ran into people. And you know, you saw people on the elevators in the factory in like really unglamorous settings, like glamorous people in unglamorous settings, just getting the work done. Yeah. One of whom was Mr. Calvin Klein, doing like then they call them the collections. And that was before it was called Fashion Week. I think it's back to the collections now, but during collection week, and everybody's preparing for the show, and it was like 2:30, coming up on 3 o'clock in the morning. And because clearly you're working around the clock those hours. And on the freight elevator off the factory was Mr. Calvin Klein himself and me alone. And I was like both thrilled and horrified that somebody of his stature, thrilled that he was there, me alone in the elevator. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Calvin Klein. And he actually knew who I was. I was like, oh my God, I can't even believe you're talking to me. But then horrified, because I'm like, you should be dreaming of sugar plum fairies on 1,000 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets right now, not here on a freight elevator, garment center. So that gave me a glimpse into the realities of this business and the kind of toil and long hours, even once you had arrived.
Right. So much for the glamour and champagne image of fashion.
Exactly. Well, he did have a luxury town car waiting for him outside of that building while I had to hail a cab. So before Uber and all that. Anywho's. And so that was kind of how that all started. And then long story short, we had a really meteoric rise, which was really unsettling and unstable, because a lot of the fanfare of fashion that is needed to drive it forward and excite people and everything with who's new and what's new, it's just like, there was my turn. I was that guy.
Yeah.
And, now everybody is so consumed with that dynamic, being famous, being known and making it all happen. But what nobody tells you on the other end of that is how unsettling it is when you are basically a fledgling in an industry that you're still learning. When you are still just finding your way of, exactly what your voice is in the industry, and everybody's telling you what you have to contribute based on a very small body of work.
Yeah.
And then they kind of inadvertently chart a course for you with all the language used and press and all that stuff. And then you're like, oh, so is that what I should be doing? I mean, I guess that's what I'm doing. And it's really weird.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to bring out your insecurities than having everybody looking at you when you're not ready.
Yeah.
It's like for instance, like Calvin Klein talking to me, and at another event, Calvin Klein and Donna Karen came up to me and congratulated me on the collection, and they gave me a lot of complimentary, language and all that stuff. I was like super thrilled about it, but also just like it was a little like, the year before, I didn't have $1 for the women's wear cover that I was on, which was also like, wow, I don't have $1 for this paper that I'm on the cover of.
Astonishing.
So, then I started thinking like, well, who else on this cover didn't have the $1 to purchase the paper that they're on, It started really like opening up my eyes to like some of the potential realities behind the velvet curtain and all that stuff, and the true grind and grit of it all. And then it added a lot more humanity for me to the superstars, what I mean? And I was like, idolized and stuff. I'm just like, wow. So saw Behind the Velvet Rope. Long story short, Japanese backer at the time that we'd secure backed out, and there I was, out of business. You know what I mean? It was really a whirlwind of experiences, and there I was having to regroup and figure it out, but not before Mattel had come along. This is a picture of Mrs. O. Obviously, that was one of the most thrilling moments in my career, having like, Mrs. O, wear your clothes. It was just, you know, obviously huge. I'm jumping all around here. I'm not really in that part of the story, but I'll just fast forward there. And yeah, that was probably one of absolutely the highlights of my career and life.
Well, I mean, exactly. It kind of fits in because Terry Agins, you know, our mutual friend, wrote an article for the New York Times with the title, Byron Lars is still here, you know, and in it, you're quoted as saying, well, you know, I had my 15 minutes of fame, but by the time you were dressing Mrs. Obama, you know, you'd had that and you'd revived and had another company and another company. And it's like you kept on going through all of the struggles of this real industry.
Yeah, you know, and I guess there's the lesson in it all. And all you have to do is see enough of those, you know, stories, those Lifetime stories on History Channel or whatever, of any famous person that you've known and any person's career who you followed that, you know, you would have deemed like that album, oh my gosh, they were at the pinnacle of success. I love that band. I love that artist. And like they talk about like they were in the pits of depression at a part when you would have thought they were at the height of like, you know, their experience. And I guess, and this is just the human experience.
Yeah.
Everything's coming at you. You know what I mean? There's great things. There's not so great things. You know, your career is amazing. And then, you know, like my first trip to China ever at the factory, and I didn't speak a word of Mandarin, and my interpreter was very suspect. My father passed away. You know, it's just like, hey, this is great. I mean, we have like manufacturing here. This is all going on. And then some devastating news like that comes your way and you're on a plane back home, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To bury, you know, your heart. And you're back in China again, finishing the collection. That's just, you know, I guess just what life is once you've been here long enough. And it's about dealing with it all with as much gratitude and courage as the Lord will provide. You know? And that's pretty much the name of this game. So I guess we can just end it here. We're finished.
Oh, no, hold your horses. Faith's going to put on another picture. And
yeah.
I want you to talk about, you know, how your designs have evolved over the years, you know, because 30 years is, and then we'll go into Barbie after the next couple of pictures, but sort of looking back on it, how have your fashion designs evolved?
I think they evolved aesthetically by, pardon me, my glasses won't say it, aesthetically by being a lot more about fabric collaging and mixing and being a little more adventurous with color, but only as a vehicle to really glorify the female figure. I mean, I, in the course of my career, became a feminist. You know, I really see these clothes as women's advocacy through the product itself. Yeah. And that's after spending so many years meeting your customer and, you know, hearing her ideas of her body, which is usually always doing a disservice to it, yeah. You know? And so clearly I'm about making clothes to really glorify that body, yeah. And make, you know, at least facilitate an opportunity for any given woman to like put something on and really see herself for the incredible being that she is. That is like by far the best part of this job, and the best part that there ever will be, is when you witness that moment of somebody that didn't think they fell in this category because they think it's, you know, fashion is all elitist and exclusionary and all that stuff. Before inclusion was cool, I mean, I was really all about it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, first of all, like I said, I mean, most people bring a lot more to the table, even physically, than they would ever give themselves credit for. And they just need the kind of construction and clothes to just show them that. Like when you see a person see themselves in the mirror looking a way that she never thought she could, you know what I mean? It's just like, wow. It's not about that dress at all. It's about her. Like, whoa, I look amazing. And yeah, you do. Because you are.
Faith, bring the next picture up too. Because it occurs to me, Byron, that one of the things is because you were so good at pattern making and because you had all of the real design skills, that's how you're able to make clothes that like flatter and enhance all different kinds of bodies.
Absolutely. I mean, you really, you know, you have to get to the nuts and bolts of any industry that you're in to really, I guess, approach it with any amount of, I'll just use the term mastery of intent, you know, because you can set out to make a bustier, but if you don't know that boning belongs in there, well, you're going to create for either a humiliating situation for the customer or at the very least a very uncomfortable situation for them at best. You need to know what makes your clothes work.
Yeah.
Because other people, I remember there was a very popular idea in school and the design, you know, student body that, well, later I'll just hire somebody to do that. Somebody else will be doing that. And then you learn very quickly that, well, you'll need to advocate for your own ideas by explaining clearly to that person who is hired to execute them how exactly they will achieve your vision.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess the overriding idea is that, like, well, they're hired to achieve it. I mean, like, they just should just know. And in some cases, okay, one could argue maybe that is the case. But then also, if you are pushing things forward and seeing things in a way that really haven't been, you know, interpreted in that particular way, it's your job to create the language that communicates that to the person whose job it is to make that a reality.
Sure. I mean, and the people like Rick Owens and like you and Isabel Toledo who know how to do that are so much ahead of people who will just do a little sketch and say, you figure it out. Because if you're advancing the field, you're doing it in a new way that has to be explained to anybody, even if they're experts in say, pattern making.
Absolutely. And then there's that thing that people rarely talk about, but I'm going to, it's a little uncomfortable, but many times, you know, it's not always like your support staff is actually supportive. You know, I found pattern makers to be a little combative with designers. And maybe that's because too, maybe they experience so often designers that don't have the ability or the willingness to explain thoroughly how to achieve something, and they might feel left on their own. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it might just be a big old dose of haterade, you know? It's just like, I wanted to be a designer and I'm not, and here you are telling me what to do, and I'm not gonna soil my hands with the likes of that idea. I don't know. But there's all kinds of varieties of reasons why your vision is not being really achieved in a workroom. And I think it is every designer's job to become friends, make advocates of your workroom. And you best do that by first being a decent human being and treating people with respect. But that's your mama's job, so I'm not going to tell you any about that. But chiefly by learning your craft and gaining their respect, that you know what you're talking about, and or at least have a true, an earnest quest to know and to find out, even in a collaborative effort to find a best solution. Then you get everybody's best.
Yes.
And that is key to making quality product that everyone can be proud of. And
well, one of the products that you became really famous for were doing these Barbies, which are so hotly collected. And Faith, maybe do the next picture too, because I think we have several Barbie pictures, right? So can you tell us, how did you get into designing for Barbie? Because you really made a mark on doing this.
Well, thank you so much for that. Actually, Barbie approached me to do the first one, which it was only supposed to be one initially, in 97. And ironically, that was like one of those high-low moments. Like that was when everything was wrapping up with my first backer and shutting down. And then they show up and present this amazing opportunity. But I didn't really see it at the time for really, I guess, the true blessing that it ended up being, because, you know, I was making a doll and trying to make her cool and cute and amazing. It was, you know, obviously they approached me to do an African-American doll, even though that was never really spoken about, but clearly that was it. And I'm like, and that's great. I mean, there should be a collectible, beautiful Black Barbie. And it's only fitting that a Black designer should be a part of that story. So anyway, but I didn't realize the impact until, like, you know, the doll, first doll was so successful. And then there were others to follow. And I started meeting African-American women out there in the world who would otherwise probably not have known me. They knew me as the guy in the back of the Barbie box. And they were like, oh, thank you so much. And some were even like close to tears because she had never seen herself that way. And I got to be honest, I was a lot more shallow about it in entering it. I just thought they were cool and cute. And you know what I mean? I just kind of approached it like from more an artistic standpoint, not really any kind of social commentary or anything like that. This is my aesthetic, and this is what I want to see.
Barbie means so much to so many people. Faith, do the next Barbie too, because, oh, sorry, that was the last Barbie there. Let's go back one bit. And so, sorry, I interrupted you for nothing. I thought there was a third Barbie up there.
No, that's okay. No, but that was pretty much the long and the short of it, but it certainly didn't end there because, you know, I was in Premier Vision, fabric shopping once, and then these two Italian men call my name from afar. And then I was thinking they must be fabric vendors that I didn't quite place at the time. They asked if I was Byron. I said yes. And then they were so excited. And they're like, can I take a picture with you? I'm like, this isn't fabric. It's like, you make the Barbie, right? It's like, I'm like, wow. Okay, two Italian dudes. I didn't see that coming at all.
Yeah. Barbie has so many fans.
She does. She does. I mean, I think she might even be more popular than Mrs. Obama. Just a little.
Look at the next one, Faye. Now, a lot of independent designers have problems with undercapitalization. And I wonder, you know, what, for example, with this dress here, what kind of financial backing have you received at various points during your career? Like, I know at one point you had your Chinese backer, Xiaojiang, and then you had your business, Byron Lars Beauty, and then also In Earnest, another Byron Lars company. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of running an independent fashion company and the need for backers?
Sure. first, I just want to clarify though, Xiao Chong is actually not a backer.
Okay.
It is actually a Chinese e-tailer.
Okay.
And they actually sell our product in China.
Okay. Very important.
But obviously financial support is extremely important because it does take a great deal of financing to make a fashion company happen. However, you know, you still got to be scrappy enough to find ways and means to, let's just say, make silk purses out of Sal's ears in the interim at times, because I mean, certainly you don't just start a company with people giving you scads of money to see what you can do. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things. If you build it, they will come. If you build it, they might come, but you got to have like some sort of means by which to sustain yourself until they come.
Yeah.
So that said, yes, there's been comings and goings with financial backing. And at this late stage in career, I am self-financed and partnered with a colleague, a longtime colleague that worked with me in the former iteration of this in Beauty Mark.
Yeah.
That's another thing too, to recognize the gold among you in your support team and the plated other medals in your team, because nobody does anything of any value alone. You just don't. You need the support, and support comes in many forms, and it's not just money. In fact, like we were just talking about, you know, making your pattern room your advocate. You know what I mean? That's not just about money. It's not just about the paycheck that they walk home with. It's about your commitment to your vision, your commitment to doing right by them, and all those other things that really make a company successful, be it fashion or anything. Yeah, making bagels, I guess. You know.
Yeah. No, you're so right. The teamwork is crucial. We see it at the museum. If you work together as a team, then it's a pleasure. Otherwise, it's a struggle.
Yeah, and it's a struggle even when you're working well together. I mean, because it's just what it is. But it can be it's so much better when you have help in the struggle. Yeah. And camaraderie in the struggle. Then it's just like, even in the struggle, it's just like, oh, can you take this to the next step? I have to collapse. And then you regain your strength and you catch up to them and you take that baton when they're waning. And you know, it's just, it's just the way it has to be to work.
Historically, Black designers have been almost invisible in the fashion industry, despite how much they've contributed and despite, you know, the appearance of stars like Patrick Kelly and Stephen Burrows and yourself. What do you think are the causes of that? And do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement will make an impact on this situation that's so frustrating that we know that Black creatives have contributed so much, and yet very, very few are recognized and remunerated in the way that you would expect. You would expect to have a much higher percentage of recognized, economically successful Black designers.
That's a multi-tiered question. So I'll start with, I guess there was a time like when Stephen Burrows was around where was you know, at the height of his powers here, that there were more Black designers.
Yes, and there were. In the 70s, there were, 70s and 80s.
And they were relatively visible. And I mean, I felt their impact. You know, as a child, like, even though I didn't really know the names of any designer because I wasn't really consciously into fashion. However, I could still, you know, like when Mr. Saint Laurent did something, he's not a Black designer, but you knew it because, of course, it reverberated around the world. Stephen Burrows was that kind of force as well. Even though I didn't know his name, I knew his work. You know, it's just like, because it was, first of all, so dynamic and so beautiful that it spoke on its own. So I knew this kind of body, this look that he created, this aesthetic that he created. There were oddly many more, Scott Barry, Arthur McGee. There were lots of Black designers in the 70s that were really gaining some amount of prominence.
Yeah.
And we regressed during the 80s. It seemed like that's when things started to kind of, I wouldn't say screech to a halt, but maybe grind to a near halt.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it had to do, I mean, with some really outmoded ideas about society and position and all that kind of stuff, because it seemed like, you know, a lot of that's when like the Jacqueline Derribes were coming on, like the patrons of expensive clothes were then putting their names on the clothes. And the idea of status and station and pedigree in alignment with this, not just raw talent, became just kind of inextricably linked with fashion, again, as it had been obviously traditionally long before the 70s. And I just don't think that, you know, a white fashion world could quite reconcile that with, you know, a Black reality. And it just didn't really mesh. And then along comes the young designer movement, which certainly did create in the 90s. Did create some kind of opening for some impetus of change, because all you need to be was kind of youngish and not doing what the establishment was doing. And that was basically around the time that when I emerged and, you know, got a shot. And honestly, at the time, I didn't even think about, you know, my Blackness as it related to my work and my place in this industry. It just never occurred to me that it was an issue. And of course, it sounds absurd, because it is utterly absurd. But I'm glad that I was that naive to not even perceive that there were the barriers that there clearly are. Because I don't know how I would have reacted to that. And then I don't know that I would have charged forth with the same kind of joy as if I thought I was in a fight, you know? But then who knows? I don't know. Maybe I would have. Maybe I would have been even more charged to, you know, prove something. But, you know, the realities become irrefutable, just as you say, by the numbers. I mean, and it's really, it's a bit demoralizing at times. It has been, but then it's also really encouraging and the Black Lives Matter movement absolutely has already initiated some change in equity here. Will it be lasting? Only time will tell. But the fact that we're having honest conversations about equity is certainly a fantastic step in the right direction. Because at the end of the day, my customer doesn't care if I'm Black, white, purple, blue, or psychedelic. I mean, the product has to speak to her, has to perform for her. It's got to be at the right price for her. And, you know, that's pretty much it. And yes, the last 3 images are from this newest iteration, In Earnest. That I started with my partner, Sheila Gray. And we clearly in the midst of the pandemic started over. And because, you know, there were a lot of things that were not working. Clearly were not working at the old business model. And as challenging as it was, and as daunting to start at such, you know, probably what would be perceived as the worst time, was probably the best time for us to do this. You know, I really think too, speaking to the designer in me, it really spoke to problem solving on an epic scale. It's just like, how on earth are you going to get people motivated to buy clothes when they're in their pajamas?
Yeah.
And, you know, the answer chiefly is just like, well, people dream in their pajamas. And so to me, the dream is dead, and you must absolutely actively keep it alive. It's your job. But imparting some jammy comfort while doing so isn't a bad idea either.
Yes. And are you making it easier? Can people buy from line? Are they buying from home? Is that part of your new business plan?
Absolutely. I mean, they were buying. We had an online platform before this, but it's certainly becoming a lot more important as we are at home. But yeah, like I said, this was a reality before this, but never more so than now.
Yeah.
And I think you really do need to communicate to the accessibility of real fashion sometimes, because like I said, when you have that moment, that in-person moment, and you can get the person to just try it on because she doesn't think she's that girl, but she absolutely is that girl, and she sees herself as that girl for the first time. Of course, the digital space becomes a bit more challenging to communicate that, because it's just different.
Yeah.
But we're meeting that challenge.
Are you going to be going around then and doing trunk shows and meeting with people? How do you actually get in contact with your customers?
Well, digitally. The way we're in contact now.
Yeah.
And which speaks to, you know, your clothes having to speak to them in the digital space, and you having to acquire the digital assets that facilitate that, you know, really showing all the detail of the fabric. I likened it to being able to touch the clothes with your eyes.
Yes, that's a very good example, because sometimes you can see the lace quality of this, the way this image is done. You can touch it with your eyes.
And yeah, and that's super important. But, you know, it just puts a lot of, everybody has to wear so many hats now. Designers, they have to be, you know, designers. They have to have some notion of content, direction, and capturing these images that show all that. I mean, you really have to be firing on a lot of pistons now, which actually, I think in many ways heightens the design experience.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's look at the next one. I think there's one or two more.
I will say, though, this whole digital reality, though, what I do miss and makes me sad is that, you know, a really good black dress is just basically irrelevant in this space. You know, like
you can't see it online. You need to touch it and try it on.
Exactly. And then there's the whole, you need to touch it and try it on. And so much of people's decision making is the picture that they create when they're sharing it to the world and their friend groups on social media. So it still has some challenges even beyond that now, which, you know, sometimes like you need a simple black dress. It's everything. Yeah. And I think that I just have faith that there'll be a time when people recognize that reality and come back to it. Please.
Yes, yes. Let me just ask, you told Women's Wear Daily, you said My Black experience does, of course, inform my work, but it doesn't entirely define it, end quote, which I thought was a really important distinction to make. I just wondered, could you elaborate on that a little, and on the pitfalls of pigeonholing designers by race? For example, I'm a museum curator. What are the problems that are involved in putting together, for example, an exhibition about Black fashion designers? On the one hand, it's good to call attention to the fact that you may not know the names, you may have forgotten, but Black fashion designers have contributed a lot. But how do you do that without the kind of pigeonholing which is negative?
Well, I think it's just really, recognizing all the varieties of Black design that there is.
Yeah.
Just because hip hop was a seismic movement doesn't mean that Black design is limited to that space.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is more the problem. Yeah. The way the perception of the outside world and then the actual work itself, the body of work itself. And I'm sure you as a curator understand, that's your mission to tell that truth.
Yeah.
In the curated array that you present to people, like, hey, do not do this because all this richness exists and you're selling yourself and the culture short if you don't recognize that reality.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's so important not to say, oh, this is this one hegemonic Black style, but rather to say there's just as much diversity here as in any other group of people. And you try and emphasize that variety of styles and aesthetics and talents.
Sure. Well, clearly though, the picture that you have on the screen now, as I say, do not limit it to like hip hop aesthetic, is a very hip hop aesthetic.
And I think there's one more here with next one, Faith, which is very much, it's also interestingly with the hair, it's like a kind of Afrocentric aesthetic, but then it's got all kinds of other futuristic elements to it, which move it in other directions as well.
Well, this is that last Barbie image, I guess, that was supposed to be with the
with the earlier ones.
Group of Barbies. And yeah, Barbie, I kind of like take a departure from my true customer and true ideals and goals. And I think back to that last image that you showed, like just showing a hip hop perspective on these clothes actually just shows to broaden the breadth of inclusion that there is in fashion, because we have that same dress on a society looking model with a long ponytail, and it's not worn as a layering piece, it's worn as a dress.
Yes.
And we really love learning about how much breadth these clothes have from our customer when they show us. This whole idea of inclusion didn't really happen overnight. It happened because people joined the bandwagon and they were included and they brought their own ideas and their own lifestyles into it. And we recognized that. And then we wanted to in turn mirror that and glorify them in there. So, it just seemed very organic the way it happened, but also really modern. And I think it keeps you thinking about how to remain relevant. Yeah. And I don't mean in a pop culture way, relevant to women's needs, their dreams and desires, because we're certainly dream weavers. Yeah. That's part of the whole imperative here in fashion. And while never losing sight of their reality. And, that has really been an interesting journey.
Yeah.
Just watching her journey,
yeah,
and having her educate us on, you know, the choices that we make. And it's why this business never gets old and will never get old, because she will always be evolving and changing, and therefore inspiring change and evolution.
Very nice. Thank you, Byron. Thank you so much. What a great interview.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure.